name's Catherine Breslin. I'm founder of a consultancy called Kingfisher Labs, and much like LY Corp that you just heard about, we're here to help businesses who want to take advantage of some of the latest innovations, and we're specifically focused in on voice and language technology, which hopefully through this talk I'll give you some insight into what that is and how it might be useful for your organization. So I've worked in the field of voice and language technology now for a little over 15 years. And so I've worked in research in academia, I've worked on products like Amazon Alexa, and more recently I've started to work consulting, helping organizations who also want to make use of this technology, but perhaps don't have access to the expertise they need to build it, or the ability to cut through some of the hype that's in the press about AI right now. So first, I want to take you back to the 1930s, and this is something I came across when I was doing research. And we've always understood that voice is a natural and convenient way for us to interface with anything. So this is an advert for the Ediphone voice writing system of the 1930s, the promise being that you could make your life more efficient, you could accomplish more by leaving your voice notes on this system and having them converted into written notes later. Now, at the time, that conversion was a pool of secretaries who would take those notes and type them up overnight, probably, or the next morning. But now, if you find very similar companies to this making use of the latest technology, the latest innovations, to do something very similar, and we replace that secretarial pool with Mechanical Turk or some crowdsourced way of transcription, and you find technology companies doing this sort of thing right now. So a lot of the things, a lot of the products and a lot of the services that are being built around the latest innovative technologies have this long history. The ideas have been around for a long time, and we've been trying to do them in one form or another. So like Audrey said, businesses are having to innovate now in order to keep themselves alive, to react to customers and what they want and what they do. And I think voice and language technology is a great way that companies can do this. So the modern incarnation of voice technology that we've all heard of is voice assistants, things like Amazon Alexa, Siri, Google Assistant, that you talk to and they will do whatever it is that you ask them. Now, behind every voice assistant, there's a complex pipeline of technology. So hopefully I'm just going to take you on a little tour of what's behind this technology and what happens when you talk to a voice assistant. So we think of voice assistants as being devices like this little black device sitting here on a desk that you talk to, and then it just does what you've asked for. And there's a lot of funny sketches and TV shows about what happens when they don't do what you ask them to do. But by and large, they work really well. It's amazing, the innovation and the pace of change that's gone into making this technology viable now. So when I talk to a device like this, I might start by asking it a question. I might say, what's my account balance? And so the first thing that the assistant has to do is to figure out what the words I said were, because all it gets is the audio. And so it runs a speech recognition system. And speech recognition is the technology that converts audio into words. So the system now knows what I've said in text, because systems don't cope very well with audio input if we want to do anything with it. So we have to convert it to something else. The next step we have in this pipeline is to understand exactly what it was that the user's asking for. And in this case, we can classify it as, we call it an intent behind what the user is asking for. So we know that this, when I've said, what's my account balance, I want to know what my account balance is. But there are many ways I could have asked that question. I might have said, hey, I wonder how much money is in my bank account. Or I could have said something very different. And each of those should result in the same action. So our language understanding system behind these assistants is going to figure out, what actually do I want the system to do? What's my intent behind what I'm asking? Then we have what we call dialogue management stage of the pipeline. Now, sometimes I might not give enough information when I ask, what's my bank balance? I might have multiple bank accounts, or perhaps I've got multiple different banks I could be asking. And the system has to decide what, if anything, it's going to ask back to me in some sort of a dialogue. So this dialogue management part is going to look at what I've said and what it's been interpreted at and see if there's anything that it should ask back. So it might say, which bank account are you inquiring about, your savings account or your current account? And then I can answer back, and then it can go and do what it is it needs to do. Then we have once we've got all the information we need to actually execute a query, the system has to go and do that action. It has to actually go and look up the bank balance in the back-end systems of my bank, or using open APIs, or however it's going to find that answer, and come up with a reply to tell me in language what my bank balance is. So it might construct the reply that says your balance is £523.64. And then the final step is that it's going to speak that reply out loud to me. So because there's no screen involved here, it's just a smart speaker, a virtual assistant that I'm talking to, it has to convert everything back into text to talk to me. So it's going to say that out loud, and then I will have completed the entire query successfully. Now, this whole setup here is quite a complex pipeline of different machine learning technologies. So speech recognition, language understanding, question answering even, and text-to-speech. They're all different technologies which are trained from data. So speech recognition systems, for example, are trained on audio data. They may be trained on thousands or even hundreds of thousands of hours of audio that's been transcribed in order to understand what it is I might say. The language understanding system is going to be trained on lots of audio, lots of text data that's been tagged with the intent, what people are asking for behind it. And of course, language is ambiguous. And so this is one of the complexities of a system like this. Sometimes I might say to my virtual assistant something which has different meanings in different contexts. So I might say to my smart speaker, play Frozen. And my smart speaker, being sort of primarily music device, might decide to play the song Frozen to me. But if I was asking my smart TV to play Frozen, it might decide to show me the film instead. So some kinds of ambiguity can be resolved by the situation and the context of where we were asking. And some things are just outright ambiguous. If I was to say, go home, that could mean lots of things. It could mean go to my homepage on my browser. It could mean to my smart car that I want to go home and it should show me the way. There's plenty of different meanings of the word home that could be. And so the purpose of a system like this is to sort of cut through some of that ambiguity, ask clarifying questions when it needs to, and help the user achieve something concrete. And so I wanted to show you this because I think we all understand what's behind a virtual assistant and what it does. And this idea of there being a complex pipeline of different technologies, I think is really interesting, because we can take each of these technologies individually and build different systems based on them. So I'm going to talk about 3 different sort of concrete use cases, clients I've worked with in the past, who have taken different bits of this technology and built systems from it. So the first I'm going to talk about is just a speech recognition system. The second I'm going to talk about makes use of some of the language understanding technology without any of the voice input and output. And the third I want to talk about is to do with a company who took this entire pipeline, this question answering, voice in, voice out pipeline, and used it in their services. So, like I said, these are some real world examples of technology I've worked on and projects I've worked on with real companies. I've obscured some of the details of some of the companies to protect their privacy, though. So the first example where I think this technology can be really useful when you're trying to understand your customers and connect better with them is just simply understanding interactions between your staff and your customers. So in many organizations, many businesses, there are plenty of times where your staff talk face-to-face with a customer. And by and large, those interactions are sort of ephemeral, they're not recorded, and they're not available to understand later. And that's changing now as we're using more and more technology, especially at the current time when we're being forced to stay home and do everything over the internet. And there's more of a chance to record those conversations and to understand what's going on in them. And so I've worked with a client who wanted to do this in terms of understanding, what customers were coming and talking to their staff about in a sales context. So in order to do this, they had to build that. They wanted to actually own some of the technology. And this is something Audrey touched on, is this build versus buy question. And many cases, many companies actually want to try and build some of this technology themselves so that they own it, so that it adds to the value of their company, so that they can customize it to exactly what it is they want it to do. And so this company I worked with wanted to build their own speech recognition system to help understand their customer interactions. And there were a couple of things that they could actually do with this once they got it up and running. One of the things that they could do is to better understand the sorts of things their customers were coming to ask them about in real time. So they could understand across locations, now, for example, that a customer in London and a customer in Leeds and a customer in Edinburgh had all come to them and asked the same thing. And they'd never seen this before. And maybe that's something that they should start to train their staff on, because they anticipate that this question will come up more. And so being able to analyze in real time what customers are asking about and sort of target your staff training, target your literature, target your organization towards answering can be really helpful. And another point that people use this for is, in some sales situations, there are legal disclaimers or things that you have to say when you're selling something to a client, in particular to do with, say, financial advice or legal advice. There are certain disclaimers you have to give, certain things you have to say to make sure that your company is complying with the regulations and the law. Now, it can be a painful and time-consuming process to go through and manually figure out if every single interaction has followed this compliance regulation. And so being able to use voice technology to understand what people are saying and then to look in those transcriptions to see whether the law has been complied with can save an awful lot of time and effort. And it's a lot of tedious work that someone has to sit down and do. So there's some real value in being able to understand these customer interactions. And I talked about building a speech recognition system for a particular customer to actually do the transcription of these. And there are speech recognition systems that exist and that you can use off the shelf. Many of the big tech companies have speech recognition systems that you simply send audio to and you get a transcription back. And they work really well, by and large, for the most part, until you get to certain scenarios where you have for example, very specific language that's coming up. So if somebody is talking in a medical context, for example, maybe your general speech recognition system isn't going to understand the medical terminology. And so building your own custom voice technology can be a great way to go forwards in these situations. So that's one example where businesses are really using speech recognition to understand how customers are interacting with them and their people. The second sort of use case I want to talk about is where customers are coming and asking questions, and those questions have answers in documents that are held by the company. So your company has a whole series of documents internally, and somewhere in those are the answers to what your customers want to know. Being able to use some of the language understanding technology to look inside those documents and extract answers can be really beneficial here. It saves a lot of time and effort burrowing through lots and lots of documents and allows you to present answers to customers much more quickly. So one company I'm working with doing this are actually doing this regarding the news. They're taking news articles as documents and they're analyzing those news articles to find out what's happening in order to be able to provide tools for journalists to do their research much quicker. So allowing journalists to put stories together, to find facts and figures quicker because they can navigate the text, they can navigate much quicker. And this means that journalists can spend less time on research and they can spend more time writing their stories, more time talking to people and that kind of thing. And this really can drive down costs and bring up the quality of what journalists are doing. And this example here, I think, is really interesting because being able to understand what's in documents is something really useful. Documents are not just written documents. They can also be video and audio documents too, if you've transcribed them. So they could be internal meetings or they could be lectures that have been given or TV shows. But once you understand the texts of these, being able to then look through them and put things together, present things to users in different ways that they might not have thought of, can really help with, like I said, driving up quality and cutting down the costs. And the final case study I wanted to talk about, where people have really made inroads and taken advantage of some of this technology, is where they have taken the entire stack that I showed you earlier, the voice in to voice out, in order to be able to help improve customer service. So the company I worked with here was a financial services provider. And they had a call center. They have a large call center operation with many, many highly trained staff. But a lot of the people calling up in that call center, some huge percentage of the traffic was actually for really simple inquiries. Because people don't phone up their banks very often, a lot of the time when they do phone up, it's to ask something simple like, which address should I send this form to? Or where's my closest bank branch? And things like that. Some of this stuff they can get online, but plenty of people still prefer phoning up customer service to find out information. And so being able to automate some of this simple queries in a customer call center allowed this company to sort of handle many of those incoming simple inquiries in a much simpler way and free up their customer service agents to start to handle more of the more complex inquiries. So this means that they could start to cut costs in their call center. They could make it more efficient. They could cut down the call waiting time for their customers, because when simple calls are being handled automatically, they can be answered much quicker, because computers can handle those automated calls far faster than humans can. And so I think there's a lot of advantages here to be able to take that voice in, voice out technology, do the speech recognition, the language understanding, looking up the answers and giving it back to the customer over the phone rather than through a smart assistant. So not every customer service query is appropriate for this kind of technology. So if a customer phones up with a really complicated, in-depth inquiry, or they're not entirely sure what they need, then of course the system is not going to cope very well with the sorts of questions that the customer's going to ask. But if that customer simply phones up and says, I live in Cambridge, where's my closest bank branch? Then that question can be answered really quickly by an automated system. So that's 3 different examples of how companies have made use of sort of virtual assistant technology and the pieces behind it in order to improve their product offerings, to make their customer service more improved, to understand what their customers are asking them, and to help answer their questions more effectively and efficiently. So I want to finish up by talking about some of the lessons I've learned from working with companies and building this technology over the past 10 years or so. And I was listening along to Audrey's talk in the beginning and her framework, and I was nodding along to almost everything she said, because I think that there's a lot of similarities between all sorts of data projects, and there's a lot of things you need to do in common. Things like getting your data in order and knowing where it is that you're going to execute, and having the right staff, having the right skill set. All of these things are important. So I'm not going to go into anywhere near as much depth as Audrey just did, but I just want to leave you with 3 lessons that I sort of encountered when I came to use voice and language technology in the real world. So the first thing I realized is that it's always good to start small, like these small fish in the ocean. It can be a change in skill set and a change in what your organization is doing if you are suddenly starting to use this voice and language technology in your products and services. And it takes a little time to get used to how it works, the sort of questions you need to ask, how you evaluate it, and all of these organizational processes that go around voice and language technology. And so by starting small, by taking something that might seem trivial, but building it out and testing it and having it work can be a really great way to start to see how you might use this technology. And by prototyping small examples and trying them out on some of your own data, some of your own tasks, you really get the chance to see whether this is likely to work before you invest too much effort in building a big solution. Because Sometimes, as Audrey said, machine learning is not the way to go. Sometimes there are better ways to do this and better ways to get value from your voice and language documents. So by starting small allows you to quickly iterate much faster than if you have a large system, and allow you to see what the value for your organization might be. The second point is related, but I would say get in front of your customers early. So as I said, language is very ambiguous and people speak in many different ways. It's almost impossible ahead of time to know how your customers are going to speak to you. And so if you're trying to build in technology to answer their questions, you need lots of examples of the actual questions that they're asking you. This is something that you can't get ahead of time. You can ask a few people for examples of how they might ask, but when you stick to your network and the people close to you in your organization, your company, you're not going to get the full range of questions that people are going to ask to you. So if you can get your technology, your product in front of customers early, you get to hear early on the range of things that they are going to ask your system and the sorts of questions they ask, how they ask them, or the phrasing, the variation in how they speak. And then you're much more easily able to adapt to that and make it work for your customers. And I think that's a really important point. And many people try to sort of build something really big, have it polished, working, ready to go, and put it in front of their customers. And then it fails because they haven't really understood what their customers are going to ask them. So by starting small and getting some real world feedback, you're in a much better position to be able to build something that really does work for your customers. And the final point here, I think, is that a lot of this technology is very much driven by data, metrics, understanding how things work on a large scale. And a lot of organizations aren't very data driven. And so you really have a lot of success with this technology if you can somehow transform to care about those metrics, to care how your system is doing on the aggregate, to really pay attention to the metrics, to figure out why your systems are performing as they are, what you can do better to address the deficiencies, and really drill down into the metrics and the numbers and the performance measures and all of these things behind it. Because without those, I think it's incredibly difficult to know if some of this technology is actually doing what you think it should. Because you can end up in a situation where you send some technology out into the world and a handful of people use it and it kind of works, and it looks like on the surface it's getting some usage and it's working, but when in reality your technology isn't working for a lot of your customers and you're not paying attention to the metrics enough to spot that. And so I really think that being able to pay attention to some of the data, the metrics, the performance of these systems is really crucial to being successful in deploying it. So that brings me to the end of my talk, and I hope I've managed to tell you a little bit about concretely what voice and language technology is and give you some ideas and some inspiration for how it might be used in your organization.